A tiny mouse crouches over the limp body of a stranger it has never met. It sniffs, it nudges, it pulls at the motionless animal with its paws, and it does not stop until that stranger wakes up. This is not a pet. This is not a trained lab animal following commands. This is a wild-type mouse acting entirely on its own, and what it's doing is something scientists thought only humans and a handful of great apes were capable of. Stay with me, because this gets so much stranger. We're going to unpack exactly what these mice are doing, why it blew the entire field of animal cognition sideways, and then, right at the end, we'll get to the part that nobody in the scientific community fully expected. And trust me, you'll want to be there for that. Let's start with the experiment, because the setup is almost suspiciously simple. Researchers at the University of Tsukuba in Japan designed a study published in 2023 to test whether mice would respond to an incapacitated companion. They placed one mouse in an enclosure and then introduced a second mouse, rendered unconscious via anesthesia, limp, unresponsive, into that same space. The conscious mouse could have ignored it. It could have gone about its business, sniffing corners and hoarding bedding. Instead, something remarkable happened. The conscious mouse immediately oriented toward the unconscious one. It approached, it sniffed intensely, and then it started doing something almost impossible to describe with the word deliberate. It began grooming the unconscious mouse. It pawed at it. It repeatedly tugged at the skin around the face and body. In some cases, it even attempted to open the unconscious mouse's eyes with its paws. Let that sink in. A mouse, with no training, no reward, no familiar social bond with this stranger, tried to open another animal's eyes. And here's the first question I want to plant in your mind right now, because we'll come back to it. Were these mice actually trying to help, or were they just confused and curious? Hold that thought, because the answer is more nuanced than you'd expect. Now, the behaviors themselves were measured carefully. The mice performing these revival attempts showed significantly elevated activity compared to control groups where the second mouse was simply placed asleep in a different part of the enclosure. The conscious mouse spent more time in close contact with the unconscious stranger than with a normally sleeping one. That distinction matters enormously. The mice weren't just responding to a nearby warm body. They were responding specifically to something being wrong. This is where animal cognition researchers started paying very close attention. Because recognizing that another individual is in distress and responding differently than you would to a resting, healthy animal, that's not a reflex. That's a form of social awareness.
It suggests the mouse is doing something like reading the state of another individual and adjusting its behavior accordingly. But wait, here's the part that escalates this from neat mouse behavior to genuinely paradigm shifting. The behavior wasn't limited to cage mates or familiar animals. These were strangers. The mice had no prior relationship with the unconscious animals placed before them, and yet the revival attempts still happened. In fact, this is where the open loop from earlier starts to close, because this tells us it wasn't just social bonding or familiarity driving the behavior. It appears to be something more like a generalized response to perceived helplessness in another mouse. Let's pause for a completely unrelated fact that I cannot in good conscience leave out of this video. Mice have been observed laughing, or at least producing ultrasonic vocalizations during play that function a lot like laughter when tickled. They also show what researchers call laugh faces, a relaxed jaw posture that mirrors human expressions of joy. Mice are laughing. If that doesn't make you feel a type of way about the tiny creatures living in your walls, I don't know what will. Okay, back to the revival behavior. And now we're getting to the part that made scientists genuinely uncomfortable in the best possible way. For decades, empathy was considered a hallmark of complex cognition, something layered, sophisticated, almost exclusively human. Then we extended it, grudgingly, to chimpanzees, elephants, dolphins. Then crows showed up and made everyone nervous. And now, mice. What the Tsukuba research points toward is that the capacity to perceive distress in others and act on it may be far more ancient, far more hardwired into mammalian biology than anyone previously wanted to admit. The researchers believe the behavior may be rooted in what's called prosocial motivation, an intrinsic drive to improve the welfare of others. In mice, this might be an evolutionary adaptation tied to the survival of kin groups. If a family member collapses, you have a biological incentive to revive them. The extraordinary part of this particular study is that the prosocial response didn't require kinship. It appeared to generalize, to extend beyond the familiar, beyond the tribe. And here is the moment that nobody in this field saw coming. When researchers looked at the neural underpinnings of this behavior, they found the same brain circuits lighting up that are associated with empathy-driven behavior in humans. The anterior cingulate cortex, the insula, regions we consider central to emotional processing, to social pain, to caring about others. The mouse brain was doing something that on a structural level looked a lot like what your brain does when you watch someone get hurt and feel that instinctive urge to help.
This raises a question that I genuinely cannot stop thinking about. If the neural architecture for empathy is this ancient, this widespread, this present in a creature with a brain the size of a peanut, then what does that mean for how we think about animal consciousness more broadly? Are we dramatically underestimating the inner lives of animals we've spent centuries dismissing? The evidence keeps piling up that the answer is yes. Rats free trapped cage mates, even when they could eat chocolate instead and no one is watching. Crows hold what looks suspiciously like funerals. Elephants return to the bones of their dead year after year. And now mice kneel over unconscious strangers and try to wake them up. The world these animals inhabit is not the flat, instinct-driven landscape we once imagined. It is rich. It is relational. It is, in ways we are only beginning to measure, emotionally alive. So here's the question I want to leave you with today. If a mouse, a creature we've historically treated as a pest, as a lab tool, as something fundamentally beneath our consideration, if that mouse has the neural wiring for empathy, what responsibility does that place on us? What does it change about how we think about the animals we share this planet with? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely read every single one. And this is exactly the kind of question that sparks conversations I don't want to miss. If this video made you see the world even slightly differently, smash that like button and subscribe, because every week we go somewhere new, and it's always wilder than you think. Next up, check out our video on the animals that grieve their dead, because after this one, you're ready for it.